Hi, I'm Katie, and I'm giving my presentation on plural marriage from Unit 11. So let me pull up my presentation really quickly. Okay. So I just wanted to start off by going over my two important summary concepts. These are things that I want you to have a better understanding of by the time that my presentation is over. So concept number one, plural marriage was a trial for many of the saints that lived during that time and is currently strictly forbidden. Number two, plural marriage was ordained of God, whether or not we agree with it. Throughout my presentation, I used two different scholarly sources. One is by Catherine Danes, called Striving to Live the Principle in Utah's First Temple City, a snapshot of polygamy in St. George, Utah in June 1880. The second is called by Andrew Skinner, called Civil War's Aftermath, Reconstruction, Abolition, and Polygamy. I also used two different prophetic sources throughout my presentation. The first is by Gordon B. Hinckley, called What Are People Asking About Us? And the second is by Elder Marcus B. Nash, called The New and Everlasting Covenant. In Doctrine and Covenants, section 132, the laws governing plural marriage are given. I have verses 61 and 62 on the slide here that kind of give a depiction of what the laws are like specifically. So I'll go ahead and read one. If any man desire to marry a virgin and desire to espouse another, and first give her consent, and if he espouse the second, and they are virgins, and have vowed to no other man, then is he justified. He cannot commit adultery, for they are given unto him. For he cannot commit adultery with that belongeth to him, and to no one else. I found this quote on the Joseph Smith Papers website it's about the life of Elizabeth Ann, and it says, after learning about the doctrine, she and her husband were both concerned and prayed for guidance. They had a vision after they prayed for guidance concerning the new and strange doctrine that comforted them and left them with such a testament of the practice that they were willing to have their daughter marry Joseph Smith in the holy order of plural marriage, as she put it. I think this is a great example of how hard it must have been to live in this time and have to follow this commandment of plural marriage and all the unknowns and all the questions and things that come with that. Along with that, I have this quote from one of my scholarly articles that says, Latter-day Saints were surprisingly obedient to the council to marry, and in 1860 Mante, only 1.6% of women over the age of 16 had never been to the altar. Mormons, however, proved that their initial good intentions exceeded their ability to endure to the end. In the 2 years after the Mormon Reformation, the number of requests Brigham Young received for cancellations of sealings rose to its highest point during his presidency. I think this quote also shows how difficult it must have been to live in this time and be commanded to live the law of polygamy. It just seems really difficult, and this illustrates that point really well. This quote is from one of my prophetic sources, and it says, the Lord rescinded his authorization and command for the church members to enter the practice of plural marriage when President Wilford Woodruff issued the manifesto in 1890. I'm going to be quoting that later in this presentation. The manifesto does not preclude any worthy man who has been sealed to a wife now deceased from being sealed to another living spouse. The foregoing is consistent with the revealed doctrine that monogamy is the Lord's standard of marriage today in the church, unless he declares otherwise. This quote I have is from one of my scholarly articles, and it says, early in the church's history, polygamy became a contentious issue with non-Latter-day Saints, and the new Republican Party declared that it was the duty of Congress to prohibit in the territories those twin relics of barbarism, polygamy and slavery. This was a major reason that they were not only harassed, but denied statehood, which is a pretty big deal. So it must have been really difficult to live in the time of polygamy when you can't even become a state. This quote here is from the official declaration number 1, which is found in the end of the Doctrine and Covenants. It's also called the 1890 Manifesto, and it is the declaration of the end of plural marriage. I think this quote is really important to know and be familiar with because it describes how temple ordinances and temple work would be stopped throughout the land if plural marriage did not end, just because all the contention that it was causing, not only with the government, but also within the church, all the problems that it brought up. Because imperfect people are all God has to work with. This quote I have here is from Gordon B. Hinckley, And it says, if any of our members are found to be practicing plural marriage, they are excommunicated, which is the most serious penalty the church can impose. Not only are they involved with direct violation of the civil law, they're also in violation of the church law. Because in one of our articles of faith, it states, we believe in being subject to kings, presidents, rulers, and magistrates, in obeying, honoring, and sustaining the law. I think this quote is a great, succinct definition of the modern day church's stance on polygamy. But in conclusion, I just wanted to go over those two important summary concepts again. The first one is that plural marriage was a serious trial for many of the saints that lived during that time and is currently strictly forbidden. And number two, plural marriage was ordained of God, whether or not we agree with it or understand it or see the purpose of it, it was ordained of God at that time. An application that I found while I was researching this was called from an article called Discussing Difficult Topics, Plural Marriage. And I'll just read this quote to you. And it says, I have noticed that many women in the church, whether they're 18 or 80, have the same concern. Do I have to be able to accept polygamy or enter a plural marriage in order to go to the celestial kingdom? I personally think that it's really important to help students recognize that such questions are a non-issue. You can't go back in time and put yourself in a different context and worry about whether or not you can do what people in the past did. I should not be asking myself if I could sacrifice my son on an altar or decapitate someone. And I think this quote goes for men and women. It can go for anybody. We don't have to worry if we will be able to accept polygamy or not to enter in order to be in the celestial kingdom one day. That's a thing of the past. If God brings it back, then we'll have to worry about it. But as of right now, we don't have to. And I think this is something everyone could apply into their lives, because it's a tricky question that comes up in the discussion of polygamy.